Hello, my name is Mike Davis-Marks and I'm the managing editor of the veteran.uk and a director of Veteran Force. Welcome to an exciting new podcast series called The Veteran Voice, featuring veterans talking about their military experiences and what they did after their service, and in particular, how their transferable skills transferred from what they learnt during the military into their new civilian roles. It promises to be an exciting listen. Roll on.
Welcome to this edition of The Veteran Voice. It's a great pleasure today to have Henry Annafi with me. Henry is the chair of the Veteran Force Ambassadors Circle. Recently became so after serving for over 2 years on the veteran.uk advisory board. We're delighted to have him with us today. He is not a veteran himself, but he brings an enormous amount to the veteran story and assistance to veterans in terms of helping to empower them in all sorts of different ways. In some cases, some who have come out of prison, and Henry has helped them move on. He is a great believer in redemption. He is a great believer in inspiration, aspiration, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his story and how that fits with helping the veteran community as such. Henry, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed.
Perhaps I could begin just by asking you to say a little bit about your early story.
Yeah, well, shall we start at the beginning?
It's a good place.
I was thinking about this, discussing this with my wife last night, why the relationship with veterans is so important to me and how that came about. And I explained to her that when I was 6 years old, I was living in a place called Hythe in Kent, which in and of itself is not that remarkable. But for a young black boy in early 1970s England, it was incredibly remarkable. I was, in point of fact, the only black child, a radius of around about 42 miles. So I was very, very unique. And 70s England, that came with its own challenges. So I used to literally wake up every day in despair because I had to endure another day of life when random strangers, adults, would literally just come up and ruffle my hair without consent, ice cream covered hands, encouraging all their people with them to come and rub my head because it was like a woolly jumper, as they put it. And so life was a daily assault in a lot of respects. And then one day, everything changed. I was playing football, and if I say so myself, doing remarkably well against much older kids. And at the end of the match, this elderly lady, who I recognized, but she was familiar to me, but I couldn't quite figure out who she was. When she saw some of the older boys starting to bully me and throw out all the names, she just came storming across the pitch, using words that I'd only ever heard whispered in the playgrounds by the naughty kids, words starting with F and C. It's like, God, were you allowed to talk to children like that, especially white children? And this lady offered to walk me home. Her name was Hythe, and it turned out that Hythe had been a signal operator in World War II. She was a widow, her husband had also served, and that was the first experience I'd had of what I now understand as inclusive leadership, mentoring, and the military in general. And ever since then, I've had an immense amount of respect for the kind of fortitude, courage, and social empathy that so many veterans who I've had the privilege of meeting over the years have demonstrated. And it was first manifested to a 6-year-old boy who didn't know how he was going to get through to tomorrow, meeting Hythe.
It's a remarkable story. So where did the story go from there?
So from there, I suppose there were huge chunks of my life in which I could sort of relate so many of the things that Kathy had shared with me in the sort of 5 or 6 years of the relationship that we developed in that time that were really, really profoundly important to me. They stood me in good stead when my parents did the classic thing that West African parents of that generation did. Told me I was going to Ghana on a holiday for a couple of weeks, which turned out to be 4 years. So the kind of...
It's a long holiday.
It was a very long holiday, yeah. The kind of holiday where they don't give you your passport. So it was a very interesting time. Going from one environment where I was very obviously quite alien to that environment and to another environment where I felt, well, suddenly there's lots of people that look like me. And I should have more relatability. But in point of fact, I was even more alien because I couldn't speak the language. I had none of the cultural norms. And I was pretty much seen as the soft English boy. I had never felt more English than when I went to Africa, perversely enough. But so much of Kathy's tales of resilience constantly reverberating in so many of those situations that were really, really challenging for me. So, going through coups d'etats and understanding that the military has very, very different faces to it, and experiencing the military and having family members who were in the military in Ghana, as it was it just showed me the stark difference in the way in which military service and disciplines can be applied and, in a lot of instances, unfortunately exploited. So I found myself when I came back to the UK, which was probably I was just before my 15th birthday, contemplating a career in the military, but I'd been through so much that it was actually more of a challenge just to try and reintegrate myself into my family structure. I hadn't really lived with my parents, and so I was quite angry, quite disruptive, and therefore not the kind of disciplined candidate who could have gone through a military program. I did join the cadets, and after 10 days decided that I was better than anything they had to offer. But
So you gave it a long shot.
yeah, that 10 days was eons to me, the kind of sort of mindset that I had at the time. But
Where were you living at this time? 'Cause
I was back in London
Right.
by this time. My mother had seen some pictures of me looking less than happy, less than healthy. And this was after the second coup d'etat that we'd experienced in 4 years in Ghana.
Yeah.
And there's some parts of that story that I won't want to disturb your listeners with, but it's fair to say that there were some pretty horrifying situations and circumstances that I'd had to endure. And when my mother found out that the family weren't being as supportive as perhaps they could have been, and that I was being exposed to far too many things that she had never countenanced, she did everything in her power to bring myself and my little brother, who was still out there at the time as well, back to the UK.
So this was to London.
Yeah.
And what, roughly speaking, what year was this when you...
This would have been 1982, yeah.
1982.
1982.
Right.
So I came back and I was the vanguard of Thatcher's babies in the sort of 4-day school weeks.
And, of course, the Falklands War.
Indeed.
So 1982.
Yeah.
Yeah. So education-wise, your school was in London?
Yeah, it was in London. I also went to study in Norwich when I stabilised a bit, and I'd always had a real passion for reading, and I wanted to become the next sort of poet laureate. I thought that was going to be something. I had a lot of experiences to share, and so that was the ambition then. I got headhunted by a marketing company, Ogilvy and Mather. So I thought then that copywriting would be a good way to sort of...
This was
after
university? Or?
Yeah.
So the university was Norwich, was it?
Yes, it was. Yeah. So that was the next step. But I again found that my personal sort of ambitions weren't really clearly realized. There were too many things that I'd experienced that made anything that felt like permanence a real challenge for me, because my life has been so nomadic and there have been so much reactivity in my life that having anything consistent started to create discomfort in me. And so I found myself getting itchy feet, went into sales, which is something that everybody had told me I would be very, very adept at. I have no idea why, but I really took to sales. It was something that allowed me to be expressive, to have meaningful kind of reciprocal conversations, and yeah, I thrived. I thrived in sales. I started working for a company called Future Industrial Chemicals, which in point of fact, what they did was they sold industrial cleaning products to industry. And I chose to do this at the height of what was then, the early 90s, the blue-collar recession. So you would have thought it'd be particularly challenging, but I really, really thrived in it. I found the resistance, the challenge of it, something that was, yeah, incredibly inspiring, really motivating.
We've known each other for a while now.
Yeah.
I mean, I always, when I reflect on what you became and what you do, I mean, one word comes to mind, and it's all about people. People, I mean, in terms of what you do, in terms of what you want to try to get out of them for themselves and their families. You went into education at one point, and then you moved into industry, but it was very much a people-focused thing. Could you just talk us through that sort of period of your life?
Sure. I think you know, the combination of life experiences that I'd had, and being on the receiving end of some of the more undesirable aspects of human behavior gave me a lifelong loathing of bullies and hypocrites. And I felt that I had to do something that allowed me to utilize the talents that most people said that I had, which was being pretty decent at engagement, bringing people together, utilize that in a meaningful way to not just help people within my community, and across the African diaspora, but people that were vulnerable and just couldn't speak up for themselves. And one of the reasons why that was, if I'm being honest, quite a selfish thing for me is because that's when I felt at my best. That's when I felt that I was following through on something that felt closer to a true purpose of mine. And the satisfaction that I obtained from helping someone who was in a really unfortunate position come through on the other side was incalculable. And I just wanted more and more of that. And that was, I'm going to be completely honest, a pretty kind of selfish motivation, but I was aware that however selfish that felt, there were people that are going to be significant beneficiaries of it. And so working within education felt like a really obvious way to do that. After being in the department for about a year or so, I literally stumbled across vocational training because, you know, African parents in that day and age were not well versed in vocational education. For them, it was academics, and I wasn't really fully conversant with the alternative kind of education pathways that there were. As soon as I was introduced to them and I realized the kind of cohorts that not just gravitate to vocational training, but end up, frankly, being dumped there, I realized I was home. That was where I could have the most impact, and I could certainly look at creative ways to try and change things systemically, as well as be a really useful ally to people within the structure as it existed at the time.
And as you were looking around with your viewfinder, you came across veterans once again when you, and this time it was in a big way, when you joined the Scaffolding, the
National Access and Scaffolding Confederation, yeah.
the National Access and Scaffolding Confederation, and some of the transformational stuff that you did there really caught the eye of the veteran, and we were delighted to give that a lot of coverage, and that of course brought us closer together, and ultimately, you became directly involved in what we're doing here, and now, as we said earlier, that you're chair of Veteran Force.
I mean, that's always been a privilege to me, and in fact, even slightly before that, my brother's best friend, Stephen, is a veteran. He served in Northern Ireland for, I think, around about 7 years.
Yes.
And when he came out of the army, it's interesting how life sometimes comes full circle, rather unintentionally. The struggles that he had trying to reintegrate, and Stephen might even say integrate for the first time, because he'd never really felt part of a societal structure necessarily.
Yeah.
Like so many people from our ethnic background, that's not an uncommon thing. It was interesting to me to sort of realize that so many of the conversations that I had with him around that time had become much more meaningful when I was able to become proactively involved in, veteran resettlement, looking at trying to identify pathways into different, careers for veterans. And then, of course, as, I'm sure we're going to touch upon, recognizing through the other work that I was doing, the Returning Citizens Scheme, trying to encourage people trying to encourage my industry, as it was then, Scaffolding, to recruit people with criminal convictions, or at least give them opportunities, discovering the horrifying number of veterans that are in custody, and that were really struggling, and in too many instances isolated and not being given any meaningful support. It just, it fired a rocket up me,
and of course
made me more compelled.
You coined a new phrase, didn't you? Really, these weren't former prisoners; these were returning citizens. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm a great believer that words are important, and certainly when you're looking at the criminal justice system that we have, I think that the most common parlance, the most common phraseology that's used for people who have a criminal conviction is an ex-offender. And there aren't too many words that I can consider that you prefix X in front of and are considered positive necessarily. And with ex-offender in particular, I would struggle to identify a person who hears the phrase ex-offender and doesn't think, I wonder what they did. When in point of fact, from my point of view, if somebody has been to prison and they have served their sentence, then that was their punishment. But I do believe that in continuing to employ words like ex-offender, we're perpetuating this unfortunate kind of paradigm where we almost take the view that prison is a place where we send people to be punished, rather than that being the punishment. So I know how it feels to have judgments made upon you on sight, let alone because of some preconceptions or misconceptions that someone might have based upon a limited amount of information someone might have about them. They're looking at a photograph rather than the movie. And so looking at the type of language we use was the starting point, because that was also going to be important to try and help employers understand not just the importance of language, but frankly, the importance of being able to look at somebody as an individual for who they intend to be and who they say they are, rather than what they may have been. They shouldn't be defined by their mistakes.
So you would, when you were working at the NASC, you would be going into prisons to talk to a number of people, different backgrounds. Amongst those, you would find veterans.
Yes.
Probably a disproportionate number of veterans, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, in the time I was at the NASC, I think it was around about 23 or 24 prisons that I went to in a period of about 19 months. It was like the world's worst Alan Wicker. I was going all over the place and just trying to educate. We also had the benefit of creating this proprietary 3D, virtual reality immersive experience.
Yeah.
So I'm reliably informed that I'm the first person who's permitted to take VR equipment into an HMP, or private prison for that matter, for training purposes, which was in point of fact at the highest security prison in the country, in HMP Belmarsh. But there isn't a single prison that I've visited in that time where I didn't meet a veteran, at least 2 or 3 veterans. And one of the things that was consistent in every single one of those situations was a lack of meaningful support for those veterans to help them to really consider what might be possible upon release. And without trying to sort of, I suppose, take the view that I had the solution. What I wanted to be able to do was to kind of have conversations that would give me a better idea about some universal solutions that could be applied, alternatively looking at bespoke pathways for veterans who are in custody as well.
And we, of course, met at a careers fair where you were actively promoting to veterans the joys of becoming part of the scaffolding business.
Yes,
that was how we met, and you obviously had this great talent for engaging with people, and the idea that nothing really goes up without scaffolding.
Yeah, very much so. I think it's
including aspirations.
Well, yes, it reminds me, funny enough, that one of the conversations I had with a veteran, was talking about his aspirations and his ambitions. And I said, well, for me, veterans are far too humble. They don't actually talk themselves up enough and recognize some of the transferable skills that they have, things that so many of us struggle with basic disciplines. Getting up on time is a skill for a lot of people. But these things are second nature to veterans. And I remember saying to this young man, George, I'll never forget it, this was in Catterick, and I said, look, one of the reasons why you have an advantage here, George, apart from all the soft skills that we've talked about, is that you have standards, right? And my experience is that life doesn't rise to the level of your ambition, it falls to the level of your standards. And as your standards are already up here, then you've got an advantage. And George is still in touch with me, actually. We do keep in touch. It's one of the things that I try to do. I want every conversation, as much as is possible, to be authentic. And I haven't met many veterans who are inauthentic, if any. That suits my African sensibilities, because I grew up in an environment where subtlety was not it was not an option. Directness and clarity was something that was ubiquitous, and I certainly find that within the veteran community as well. So it's something I truly appreciate.
The Veteran.UK team and the Veteran Force team were so impressed with the humanity of what you do that we, of course, were delighted when you agreed to become chair of the Veteran Force Ambassadors Circle. And how would you describe your ambitions for that particular post?
I felt you were going to ask me this question, and I knew I'd struggle to answer it because I am a classic blue sky thinker, and I always believe in the art of the possible. I think for me, looking at my own sort of journey, looking at people within my family network, for example, I would say that they are largely uninformed about veterans. And the older members of my family have a very coloured view of the British military. And so for me, having any opportunity I can to dispel some of the misconceptions is of benefit. But I think I can sort of extend that beyond the reach of my sphere of influence to organisations, stakeholders, various people of influence, to enable them to understand just what a valuable resource and commodity we have in order to address some of the societal issues that are seemingly becoming more and more prevalent. And so in my mind, I'd like to think that what I'm going to be able to do is to increase the influence of the influencers. And I would then hope off the back of that, we'll be able to provide more pathways into meaningful experiences, whether it's employment or whether it's working in voluntary capacities, whether it's being in an advisory capacity for the veterans who are out there who are more than happy to contribute their skills into addressing some of these societal issues that we have. And I do think that there is certainly an opportunity to provide veterans with the chance to be collaborative in a way in which perhaps they may not have been able to whilst they were serving, which is not to say that there's adversarial relationships with the military as much as it is to say that there can be competition, and I think it's very, very healthy. But putting them in an environment where they can have that opportunity to truly be collaborative, I think will be exciting for them. It will be a great example to those of us on Civvy Street who always talk about how much we respect and revere veterans, but very rarely display that in any meaningful capacity. So to be able to provide that forum and that platform, I think is going to do a great deal to address some of the things that are so personally important to me. We talk very often, for example, about intergenerational mentoring and how I think it's one of the greatest assets that we don't know that we have. And it's not just about people of, I'm going to call myself mature rather than old, but people of my generation imparting wisdom and kind of talking in a top-down fashion. For me, it's even more important that we're listening to younger people and getting an understanding of the challenges that they're facing, and ultimately, as a consequence, identifying a mutually beneficial solution. Now, veterans, I think, are second to none in their ability to mentor and motivate young men in particular. And whichever way we slice it, there is a crisis amongst young men. It's ludicrous to me that the number one killer of young men in the country is suicide. It's stunning. And I know, I haven't got the latest stats on this, but I know that within the construction sector, for example, it is even worse than that. My understanding is that this is something that's not uncommon within the veteran community as well. So if we're able to, by demonstration, show all of the positive activities that are being undertaken through these alignments and these associations and these collaborations, both through connecting civilians to veterans and allowing veterans to take the lead in addressing some of these societal issues and coordinating activities, then I think that it's the best possible way in which you can spread the gospel, so to speak, by doing rather than talking about it. And my experience of veterans, they'd much rather be doing than talking anyway. So they can leave the talking to me. We'll go out and make sure that we're doing all the right things to promote the amazing work that's going to be done. I've heard a rumour as well that the first grants come in, so I've already thought of ways in which you could spend that money, but I'm pretty sure that the chair will have some things to say about that. So I know it's cliche, but genuinely I think the sky is the limit. And the unfortunate reality is that there are so many challenges that we're facing as a country, as a planet. regardless of whichever side of the fence you sit on politically, regardless of whatever your kind of personal sort of cultural sort of imperatives or motivations might be, I think there's a shared reality that we are facing some incredibly challenging times. And it behooves all of us to try and utilize the best resources available to us, in terms of people resource as well as the more obvious kind of resources that people talk about. Utilize these resources as best we can to address these issues, because they're not going anywhere. And I'm really comforted to know, and I want more people to be comforted to know, that there are some incredibly skilled, determined, resilient individuals. And I think resilience is a key word for me. I haven't met any people that are more resilient than veterans. Well, maybe apart from single mothers.
Henry, it's been a delight having you on the program, and many thanks for everything that you do for both TV UK, the Veteran.uk, and Veteran Force. And I wish you all the very best as chair of the Veteran Force Ambassadors Circle, and really look forward to working with you.
Appreciate it. My pleasure.